Melissa, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the March 4th meeting of the Finance Committee. And my first order of business is, since we're conducting this virtually, is to make sure that everyone of the committee members can hear and be heard. So I will just call on you as I see you on the screen. Bob Hegner.
Present.
Councilor Haneke.
Present.
Andy Steinberg.
Present.
Tom Porter.
Present.
And Alicia said she would be late, and Bernie said he couldn't attend this week. So we are accounted for, and we have a quorum. The first order of business on the agenda is public comments, but I just want to let people know that in addition to the second quarter, Melissa told me earlier today, so this is under the 48-hour rule, we'll also get an update on the town budget. As well as start looking at potential dates and meeting dates for the Finance Committee, and I'll show that on my screen when we get to it. So at this point, I am opening it to public comments. And please remember that you have up to 3 minutes, depending on how many people want to speak. I may hold it to 2, and you should be talking about matters before the Finance Committee. So please raise your hand if you would like to make a public comment. And Melissa, you are...
Do you want me to allow Anna in first?
Yeah, hers is the first hand in, and you just allow to speak, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi there.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Anna.
All right, you ready? I have 3 minutes. Is that right?
Up to 3. Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm going to do my best. Okay. Go. Hi there. This is Anna Devlin-Gothier, and I am speaking as an individual, not as a town councilor. I hope this committee will discuss possible scenarios to increase the school budget in the coming fiscal year. We know that the costs of education have increased in ways that other departments and services simply have not. The methods of delivery have become more expensive for education. For example, where schools used to purchase a textbook and continue to reuse it for multiple years, now schools must use online textbooks and programs which operate on a per year or per license basis, adding to those annual operating costs. Students now start needing Chromebooks in elementary school, a lot more expensive than pencils and paper. Simply put, this issue that we're facing is not as simple as being a matter of the schools not being able to spend and plan within their bounds. It is a matter of the work of education changing beyond just inflation and more rapidly than other areas of municipal services. I urge the Finance Committee to recommend amendments to the Town Council budget guidelines, increasing the percentage going to the schools to at least 4.5%, if not 5%. A bump to 4.5% would increase the dollar amount going to the schools by about $458,000, up from the initial 3.5%. Is it enough? No. Will there still be heartbreaking cuts? Yes, but we can also supplement budgets in other ways, which I hope you will consider in your discussion of free cash. A while back, several of us on the council advocated for delaying spending funds from the budget surplus to give time for the schools to submit capital requests, for example, the middle school roof. I was disappointed when no requests came. I don't know why the schools did not submit any requests for those funds, but I hope they will in the future and that the council and the town manager will support them in doing so. With a new finance director and superintendent, we need to make sure that the process is clear and accessible. I hope the council can release the mindset that equal percentage increases is the fairest way to divide the budget. It is simply not nuanced enough, and we need to release that mindset. Once we accept this, we also need to work to build a better system to make more informed decisions in the future. This will include getting budget forecasts from the schools that we've asked for and not received in the past, but also working alongside our other elected colleagues and not being afraid to look critically at how other town departments spend their funds and forecast that spending. I know none of you enjoy seeing the cuts to education. I know you all do value education. And I know it can be frustrating to constantly be told that you don't and to, quote, find money. But what we need for you to do is to stop looking at this as a matter of being equal, but instead equitable, taking needs and nuance into account. We need to stop going year by year, but start looking strategically at what information we need and when. And we need to start asking ourselves who is in the room at these critical decision points, getting to make the decisions that impact all of the different municipal sectors. The type of cuts proposed under the 3.5% increase will change educational delivery and services drastically. but we can strategically make a difference that stops the necessity of annual Band-Aid fixes and model how to cooperatively create municipal budgets that help both our current and future populations. I think there is a way we can do something innovative to improve our process for future years, and we can support the schools this year. I look forward to working alongside you to find that solution and hope you'll start today by asking how might we, instead of stating we cannot or we always have done it this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I see 4 more people.
Do you want me to just take them in
Oh,
order of
actually, it looks like you've allowed me to control, so
Yep.
I can do. I'll fit the
Okay.
next person in. Hey, Arlie, you should be able to
Yeah.
speak.
Hi, good afternoon. So I was very happy that the town council passed a vote to put into the town manager's goals about securing funds for the library. I just want to say that over time around this issue of the financing and the library, there's always this talk about what the town council's authority is and not to step on the authority of the town manager and things like that. And so I was looking at the town charter and I came across a couple of quotes, and this is what I found. The town council may require the town manager to appear before it at any time to provide specific information on the conduct of any aspect of the business of the town. That was the first one. And then under the town manager's section, the town manager shall be the chief executive officer of the town and shall be responsible to the town council for the proper operation of town affairs for which the town manager is given responsibility under this charter. So here's a responsibility the town manager is given a responsibility here. It seems to be where the idea of he's the only one who can sign contracts and be the sole decider about things. As far as I can tell, this is where it comes from. The town manager will be responsible for purchasing all supplies, materials, services, and equipment for all departments and activities of the town, and for awarding and executing procurement contracts except for those under the jurisdiction of the school committee, regional school committee, and library trustees, unless otherwise agreed on by said entities. So yes, this is his purview, but it's in the context of him being responsible to the town council for the proper operation of town affairs, for which he's been given responsibility under the charter. So when people are talking about the town council stepping on the executive power, I think these quotes sort of speak to something that is a little less, I don't know, black and white, because it says shall be responsible to the town council. He is appointed, not elected. So that makes sense to me that that language is in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlie. Maria, and I am going to please ask that people hold their comments to 2 minutes because we have several more hands up now, and we have a full agenda for today. Maria, you're up.
Thank you, Kathy. I'll try to go under that. Maria Kapicki, South Amherst. I am also speaking about the library project. I do appreciate the action taken by the town council to add that amendment to the goals of the town manager. I don't know how much you guys are aware of what's going on with things, so I'll just let you know that a third deadline, an extension, was submitted again without discussion by the library building committee, again without discussion by the town council, just unilaterally made by the president of the trustees and by the town manager. That has financial implications. You should have been consulted on that, for that matter. The Library Capital Campaign continues to withhold critical information. They still will not report on what they're spending. They still are not reporting the difference between pledges and actual money. You still haven't heard from the town manager about what he thinks secured means and what that would look like on a very, very, very good day. This project might stay at 46 million, but the library portion is 7 million behind according to their best case scenario, and it could be much worse than that. Nobody has explained how they're going to deal with that. And you have not heard from the general contractors. It is going to be a half a year that the bids were submitted. You all know that a lot has been going on in the world, and you need to demand to know what the conversations have been with the general contractor. The building committee has not had any input whatsoever on the changes to the roof or the other things that are coming out of the Section 106 process. And the Section 106 process is not over, and there is an environmental review that has to happen as well. So please, Finance Committee, you are the first step to first fiscal responsibility. Please demand answers. Please be critical, and please find out. You need to step up. I appreciate what you've done so far. There's more to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Laura Steinman. Laura Yvonne Steinman.
Thank you. My name is Laura Yvonne Steinman. I'm a Florence resident. I teach at Wildwood Elementary School. And I'm on this call today saying that you need to change your process and that it be a non-negotiable that we fund our Amherst and Pelham public schools. Right now, with the proposed cuts, you're cutting essential educators. I'm not sure if any of you have children or family members or friends that work in the schools presently. If you do, please talk to them. As you've probably heard from other meetings, people have advocated to say that funds need to be allotted so that we have equitable education for all students. With the current cuts, that is not possible. In a town like Amherst, it should not be on the plate that students cannot have an equitable education. So I charge you again to look at the budget and to make sure that there are enough funds so that everyone can be educated in public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I see, Alicia, I see you've joined us. I just want to make sure you can hear and be heard.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay. Rachel,
Hi there, can you hear me?
yes.
Hi, thanks for taking my comment. My name is Rachel. I am a parent of 2 Fort River Elementary students, and one of them is soon approaching the middle school this coming school year. And like many others today on this call, I'm calling to thank you for your service and your work and your commitment to our town and the students in it, and calling to beg you to rescind the budget guidelines according to what was said at the end of the meeting on 2/27. I'm really urging you and this whole council to focus on supporting both of our school districts. Our children don't, stop being Amherst residents when they move from the 6th grade to the 7th grade and the 8th grade in our middle school. I'm very concerned having my elementary school kid move into a middle school that seems quite fragile at the moment. And I think that the situation at the middle school and the high school are even more dire than the elementary schools right now, especially with the approved expansion of the Chinese immersion charter school and what funding that will draw away from our district and possibly losing additional students to it. So again, like many others who have asked on this call, to just take a solutions-focused approach to funding our schools equitably, not equally, and keep in mind those of us who, we moved here specifically for these schools. And that's it. Everything else has been said, so I don't need to go on. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you, Rachel. Pete,
Hi, this is Pete Nolan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, we can.
So I am a Pelham resident. I have two daughters in the school system here in Amherst. And I'm also a special education teacher. I taught for 2 years at Fort River and a year at Wildwood. And I'm able to tune into this meeting today because of we had a burst pipe at the school today. I would like to say that I'd like to echo what Laura Vaughn said. This proposed budget for next year has forced the district to make drastic cuts to special education. They've had to remove 4 teachers from all the elementary schools, or it will mean that. This means that the district will no longer be able to commit to supporting co-taught inclusive classrooms. And students who learn differently will be spending a lot more time outside of their general education classroom. And I think this is a travesty. We've also been in the proposed budget forced to eliminate the intensive reading and fluency program for students with the most severe types of dyslexia. And these are students who need one-on-one support to learn to read. And eliminating Betsy Dinger's program is, it's really, there's not a word for it. It's going to cause harm to students in our community. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I thank everyone for keeping their comments short. I'm closing public comments.
There's one more
Melissa.
hand up.
Oh, is there one
Kath?
more hand up?
Yeah.
Someone else raised their hand?
Yeah.
All right. I'll let one more person in. Elizabeth, you are with us.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I am a taxpaying resident of District 2. I've been living here for 17 years. I do want to emphasize what everyone else has stated. I'd like all of you to know that I have 2 young adults who successfully graduated from our high school. My youngest child was able to actually start from kindergarten, and they're both thriving. And I just want to emphasize that is because of our schools. I started my teaching experience in New York City. I then taught in Springfield, in Holyoke, and I've been teaching here at Wildwood School for the last 12 years. And I have to say, by far, my colleagues do an excellent job of educating. Our districts, both of our districts, do not just teach them how to read, write, and do math. There's a creativity, there's an integration of their education that my one child who's successful has been able to move on from just the high school and be successful. My other child was able to get a scholarship at a very good college. So I'm just trying to emphasize that all of these things together, when you cut the budget, you really impact more than just a couple of educators. And I'm not trying to minimize that. I'm just trying to say that it's more than what you might think, because at the ground level, there's a lot of work that happens. I myself have written grants, for example, to help our students get a well-rounded education.
Elizabeth,
so I won't go any further. I just wanted to say that please invest in our schools. Please rescind the budget guidelines so that our school committees can resubmit a budget and that you all work together. Thank you.
please end up. I see one more person. I think I'll let one more person in, but it would have been good to raise their hands at the beginning. We have a very filled agenda, including talking about the budget. I think I've let you in, Monica, if you unmute. Monique, sorry.
Hi, my name is Monique Shipman. I am a special ed para at Wildwood Elementary School. In my role, I have worked not only with our most vulnerable students, but I work in almost every classroom in the last 10 years, accommodating students. I have seen firsthand how cuts have already hurt our students. And I am very concerned for all the cuts, how they will affect our most vulnerable. Cutting specials by 1% just doesn't seem large, but our special ed students get extra time from those teachers to better access curriculum in the general ed time periods. And that's where they make some of their best connections. These cuts that are being made are going to affect the most vulnerable and the hardest. I am please asking you to find a way to not make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Okay, we are going back to our agenda. And you're on, Melissa.
Thanks, Kathy. So, do you want to look at the agenda first, or do you want to just look at the,
I think we can go right ahead. It's a pretty straightforward. It's first, we're doing the second quarter
okay,
with
second quarter
questions,
report?
and then an explanation of free cash. And I
Um,
told people you've got the additional agenda item of a revision, update on budget projections.
So can you see the screen now for the first or the second, I'm sorry, the second quarter report?
Yeah, maybe you can make it a bit larger. I can read it,
Sure,
but I'll
sure.
wait to see whether others can read it as well.
So generally, this is just our second quarter report, and you know, we're halfway through. This is halfway through the year. We're further than that now, but this is the halfway through the year, and we're about 50% in both revenue and expense, a little bit more on both sides of 50% of the way through the year. There are some outliers, of course, and so, you know, do you want me to show the details that I'm talking about or the narrative? What's more helpful to the committee?
I think you should speak to the high level and then focus on details. Everyone's had it in the packet and
Okay.
probably has questions.
Yeah.
Or
So,
comments.
you know, Cherry Hill, this is a seasonal operation, so that's why they're, you know, it doesn't operate evenly throughout the year, so it's very typical for this, the revenues to kind of lead in the early part of the summer's months and then at the beginning of the spring, and then they sort of have a downturn now. The investment income is performing well above expected amounts. I know that there will be questions about that, and I have a lot more to say about that later, but you know, it is performing extremely well. Fines and can't say the words, forfeitures typically are collected early in the year because that's for past due bills. So we collect the late fees of last year's bills or in the beginning part of this year when people remember that they missed a bill or they get an opportunity to catch up. License and permits don't come in evenly because large permits come in with large burden buildings, so that it's not necessarily even. I think we're performing well in that area. Medical reimbursement is just a 2-time-a-year payment. The miscellaneous recurring revenue, this is our these are our strategic agreements, which the council and committee are well aware are changing in this year. So the way they come in was different than expected. Motor vehicle bills, the first mailing of motor vehicle bills went out a few weeks ago. So you might have gotten some feedback about that. Those are and so the majority of that revenue is collected in the next 2 months. Is the lion's share of that revenue will come in the third quarter. Hotel and motel tax is on track and doing well, and property tax is about halfway there, which is what's to be expected, and state aid is about halfway through, which is to be expected. Under pilot, we include our interdepartmental transfers from the enterprises, and those come in one journal entry transfer, so they do not space evenly throughout the year. As far as expenditures, IT, they pay a lot of their maintenance fees at the front of the year. They have annual maintenance contracts for our softwares that they have to pay in July. The big outlier is in employee benefits, and we have a surplus in this. We have a surplus in this expenditure line due to the fact that this is where we chose to spend the ARPA funds that had not been allocated at December 31st. This was a legal expense for us to use on our health insurance benefits. So we paid those bills, and so we have more than our budget available left at this time to get through the year. And so we anticipate that there should be a large surplus in that line by the end of this year. Miscellaneous insurance is our audit costs and other insurance premiums for like liability insurance. And that comes, we pay the bill early in the year, and we're gonna do the allocation of it in the third quarter. Snow and ice, we've had a tough snow year this year, so we're spending a little extra. And veteran service is more than halfway through. A Cherry Hill, same thing. That's a seasonal operator, so it doesn't have an even distribution. Assessments are a journal entry that we do early in the year and should take up most of the budget right away. Same with most of the interfund transfers. And the Jones Library has a practice of spending their general fund appropriation first, and then leaning on their grants and other revenue sources later in the year. Enterprises are right about at 50% and are doing pretty well. You will notice that the water and sewer expenditures, that's where the sludge is. And so there was an appropriation done a few months ago to cover a large expense that they anticipated in the sewer fund. So I just want to call out in this here, obviously this is the investment income. We're almost at $1 million halfway through the year. And then the other big driver here is going to be the employee benefits, where we have this budget of $6 million still available. And again, that's because we spent the ARPA funds on insurance bills and are not fully utilizing our budgeted amount for the insurance benefit. So that is the quarterly report. Does anyone have any particular questions, or do you want to talk about free cash and how this all flows to free cash first? Or do you want to ask questions about this
Why don't we
report
have
first?
questions first? I have a couple and Mandy's hand is up. And I also did a quick computation of what I think free cash might look like end of year. So Mandy, you go first.
Thanks. Some of my questions might relate to the added item under the 48-hour rule about potential budget projections. But I'll preview them here, and if your response is just wait till we get to budget projections, that's fine. But I am concerned that in particular some of our revenues are above our budgeted amounts already, not above the 50% budgeted, but above the 100% expected projected revenues. Hotel, motel taxes, licenses and permits are nearly at the full budgeted amount, and then this miscellaneous recurring, which is the pilots. And so, you know, hotel motels have already surpassed the yearly budgeted amount, and they've been above the budgeted amount for a number of years. So that's one I want to look at when we get to budget projections, as to they weren't really modified in the FY26 budget projections. So I want to talk about that when we get there, as to what we're doing about that there. Same with licenses and permits. My question as it relates to this year with licenses and permits are, given that there's no amendments to the budget projections, but this current fiscal year, we changed our rental registration permitting fee structure that should be bringing in a whole lot more money for licenses and permits. I think that's the line it comes in at. Is that what is driving, partially what is driving this nearly being at the full budget amount halfway through the year? And what are then, again, as we get to the projected amounts, what are we doing to modify those to include that increased revenue due to the rental registration fee amounts? And miscellaneous recurring already surpassed. You mentioned that a little bit. It's because I think of the strategic partnership agreements. But again, when we look at the projected revenues, you've projected them at the same as this year's budget, and we've already surpassed this year's budget. So when we get to projected revenues, I want to hear about what we might be doing to modify them to better match. That's on the revenue side. So it's more of concerns that we've under budgeted again, or under projected our revenues in those particular areas that are going to drive some small surpluses on the revenue side. On the expense side, I'm concerned that our miscellaneous and insurance is already 168% above our budgeted expense line. You briefly mentioned that, but could you go into more as to why that is already more than 50% above what we budgeted? And then debt
I think Holly
service,
wants to answer
I understand.
that.
I have two more.
Okay.
Debt service is really low. It's only at 8% spent of the budgeted amount. I don't know whether that's because when we pay debt service is in the second half of the year, but if you could talk about that one. And then I thought it was interesting that our elementary education has only spent 41% of its budgeted amount. Is that normal for this time of year to be not near the sort of, or nearer to the 50% amount, or not on the elementary side? Thanks.
So if I may, I'll quickly speak to the insurance one. So with the insurance, what happens is we get billed as the entire town's insurance pool at the beginning of the fiscal year in October. And then it takes us some time to allocate those costs out to the library, the elementary schools, and the enterprise funds. And we have not done that exercise as of yet. That typically happens in the spring when we get a little more time after budget to kind of allocate those expenses out. So that is the answer to that. On the debt service, that is exactly what's happening, is we very likely have not made our principal payments. Typically there's a interest only payment, and then there is a principal and interest payment later on in the year, and we just have not started to pay down principals yet. I believe we've only made interest payments through December. So that one. I can go back and I will quickly, while you're speaking and other people have questions, and I will look at the schools. I mean, the schools control their own budget, so I'm not 100% sure where they typically are this time of year, but I can go back and do a quick check on where they've been in December the last couple of years, and I'll answer that one in a minute, and I'll let someone else answer the rest of the questions.
So I think the rest of the questions were on revenue items. Holly handled all the expenses? Am I correct there, or did we miss one? Okay. And so I would say that I do believe that that we did look at increasing both the hotel, motel, and the meals tax slightly with our revenue projections. I thought that was one of the areas that we had pushed a little bit. They're not large numbers in terms of the overall budget, so it may feel small, like tens of thousands of dollars versus hundreds, in that amount, but we can look at that again. I thought we had looked at that, but again, I'm happy to look at it again. The agreements have changed this year. And I will say that we are budgeting in the general fund the amount of the agreements that we can. Some of the agreements came in very specific to who those funds go to. And so for that reason, some of the, in the future years, some of the way that while we're receiving more money from them, they've been allocated to specific departments. And so therefore it does not flow through the general fund the way that it had in the past. Looks specifically, the language written for the Amherst College agreement states it as a gift. And as a gift, it does not flow through the general fund. So in next year, that agreement will look, while we are receiving a very generous gift from them, it will not flow through the general fund the way that has in the past. So then there was another one that you were concerned.
Licenses and permits.
Licenses and
particularly
permits.
rental and
Yeah,
registration.
licenses and permits. So honestly, the big driver in licenses and permits is that is usually a large construction permits, which can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they just kind of come in as the big project happens. So while the rental income would produce some additional revenue, and I think that it has, it's not the big shift. It's a consistent small increase versus the big shift that we see in building permits year over year. So sometimes when the building permits jump up a large amount, it has to do with a specific large project. And I am not sure what this year's was. Like last year, it was a building, I'm pretty sure on the Amherst college campus it was an enormous permit, and it accounted for a large amount of our revenue in that year. So I can get back to you on what's driving the permit increases here, but you're right to assume that the rental program is increasing revenue, but those are not the big dollars. That's not what makes the big fluctuation in that line.
I see Andy's hand is up, but Paul, are you speaking to the things we just went through? Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
if you don't mind, thank you. So just to clarify, Melissa, when the council raises fees for the rental registration program, for instance, that flows into that line item or to a certain, and then that money, even though the council wanted to make it revenue neutral, that revenue gets divided up amongst the 4 entities. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's the way all general fund revenues work. So any money coming into the general fund gets, based on our current model, those revenues get distributed. So even though rental registration, there might have been, or I had heard talk that there was an intent that, well, these new fees will help pay for the additional staffing needing in that department. It doesn't really work out that way for that department. So in order to start these new initiatives, which do bring in new revenue to the town, they don't fully support the increase in the cost of that department because the rest of the group shares those new revenues. Is that what you wanted to clarify? Okay.
So Holly, are you want to be speaking to this as well?
I just wanted to address one more. I believe Councilor Haneke had asked about the miscellaneous recurring and that it is already at about 100%. I just wanted to remind folks that part of miscellaneous recurring is the opioid settlement funds. So we have already, I believe, received about $80,000 of the opioid. That is an unbudgeted revenue that is intentionally going to come in above what we budgeted because it flows to free cash and then is appropriated in the following year. So that opioid money and that one line item, I just wanted to remind folks of that piece. Thank you.
Andy.
You said,
Andy, you're muted.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. On the expenditure side under employee benefits, I didn't understand what was going on. You said the budget surplus in employee benefits is, and then you gave due to ARPA funds. And when I looked on the next page for the actual listing, it looked like we were, I was trying to put the two of them together and having trouble doing that. So I wondered if you could give a little bit more explanation.
So it says, so we only budgeted 4.5 million for only. We budgeted $4.5 million for health insurance or for insurances, all insurances. And you can see that but we have a balance remaining of 6.7 million. And that's because right now the amount spent from this account is 2.2 negative. It's like adding money into the budget because we paid bills that we had paid for health insurance out of this account for all the insurance we've paid for the first 6 months of the year. And so now as we pay the second 6 months of the year, that will probably go to close to zero, you know, and then we'll have that full $4 million-ish left in health insurance. Well, probably around 3.8, like we talked, or like we talked about we spent $3.8 million on health insurance. And so when we get to the end of the year, the budget for the benefits line won't show the expense of the $3.8 million because we paid that from available ARPA funds through the allowable revenue replacement clause of, and that health insurance was a legal expenditure to be paid for prior to December 31st, because we didn't have those projects that were allocated for under contract. So we had to find a way to just spend the money so that we did not have to send it back.
So if I can just help clarify, so the ARPA money is going into, we're using the ARPA money before December 31 to pay health insurance. So as a result, we're not spending money on health insurance, and that will show as a major surplus at the end of the fiscal year that will then flow into our free cash.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm up next. I was going to restate it that way, Paul, as well. So I'm, counting up. So that's 3.8 is the expectation. And we actually saw a note on this when we were doing banks that all of the ARPA money was being moved, but where it got moved to pay down employee benefits. So I have a question and then a couple comments. One, if you scroll down to the debt service, Holly, you said it's partly because we start out paying interest. But I just looked at what we thought debt service was going to be for 2025, and 1.12 million of it is for the Jones Library project. And as we know, it didn't start, so we didn't incur that debt. So I think an answer to Mandy's is that we will end with not spending anywhere near 3.2. So if I just did the simple one, if I take Jones out, it's 2.2. We won't be spending 1.1. So that's correct, I think, because when I looked at the capital plan, that line item was in for FY25, as I said, at the 1.12. So Holly, I think that is a piece of it, that it's not just a question of interest and principal, but it's something we didn't actually go to the bond market for. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So we do have bands that are renewing, and because there were allocated funds to in debt service to pay down debt that wasn't issued, we did that. We paid down we paid down more aggressively in any line that we could that stayed within the same funds. So I used as much of that surplus budget to pay down short-term debt in order to save the town money on interest income because we had the money budgeted for a debt pay down, and because we didn't issue the library debt, we had other debt, so I paid down that other debt more aggressively.
So the budgeted debt service line is not necessarily the one that we'll ultimately see, because some of it is, I think I understood what you just said, but we won't know what the net is until the year closes.
Correct. Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah. And
Because
unfortunately, a lot of the debt is due in May, so that's when you see it really come out. May is a very common due date.
Okay, and the other one that we haven't yet seen, and I think I know the reason why, is excise taxes. Since I just paid our cars, they come in February, so the excise tax is running below 50, but I think it's because it all flows. It's an annual excise.
Right, yeah. So commitment one goes out in February or March, and basically I'd say 85% of all motor vehicle bills are collected in the spring.
So if I went through potential free cash at the end of FY25, and I know it's dangerous to do that based on a half a year, but if I took the ARPA 3.8 and the fact that we're running almost $1 million high on investment income, and as Mandy said, we're only halfway through, we're at 4.8 million at the end of the year, I think. And that's why I was also asking about debt service. If we were under on debt service as well, that would be another X dollars. And I don't know to what extent we can be looking at the likelihood of where free cash. And I also know that we allocated a bunch of current free cash to the Bang Center. So one of the first things we'd need to do is get back up to the carrying 5%. So just, thinking where we're going to be at the end of the year. I don't know whether you have any reaction to what I just said and trying to figure that out. Yes. And I see Holly's hand is up, and then I think Mandy's hand might have been up in response to my comments, but Mandy and Holly.
My reaction to free cash is no idea until the fiscal year ends. I can't even begin to judge which departments would have savings, which departments would be over. I mean, we can do rough back of the napkin estimates, but I would never be estimating free cash halfway through a fiscal year. I would, as a comptroller, never. So
Fine.
that's my
and-
response.
No, and I think rightfully so as comptroller, and I don't know when we'll see third quarter this year. So Mandy, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I just wanted, I think we're gonna have to regularly let the public know that whatever that budget surplus on the expense side is next year, approximately 3.8 million of it was for ARPA, and we've already allocated 2.8 million of that out of free cash. So it's going to be an inflated number automatically. But we've already allocated that. So I guess my question about that allocation is, when we did that financial order, when the actuals come out at the end, when FY25 is turned from a budget to an actual on our budget projection sheets and everything, that 2.8 million shows up somewhere in that document, right? And so will it actually offset the 3.8 million from the expense side, quote, surplus in the health benefits, because there will be a 2.8 million expense out of free cash showing up within that line, so that maybe it won't.
So it won't show where
as-
you, it won't show where you're saying, Mandy, but I do address that in my free cash kind of general discussion. So if you want to wait for that
we-
question.
So if
So
we're
it
done,
doesn't show up when, if I look at a prior or a former BCG projection, there's a free cash financing source on the revenue side, and it won't show up as a 2.8 million there. And then when actuals are done for FY25, and then it wouldn't it also show up as a capital budget cash, capital, free cash, capital reserve, 2.8 million expense there too? I guess that doesn't take care of the 3.8 that's coming in less from there, but does it there will be lines for it in the action.
Right, yeah, it'll
right?
be lumped in, with the other transfers. So, like when we have, when we have all of it together, then it will show there. As the transfer, from free cash into the stabilizations and to capital. So it will show separately as to capital, and then both at the top and the bottom, but it does not, it is not part of the transaction where you see the close of the end of the year budget surpluses. They come in from two different places. But I did make an attempt to sort of explain how the, how free cash is developed and sort of what the funding sources are.
so Tom, are you still on the quarterly, the second quarter? Because once we close that, Melissa can go to the next piece.
Yes, I've just got a very quick question. It's a small item. Just curious, when there's something that has had no activity in the sustainability department operations, I'm just curious if there's a timing reason for that, or is there something that has changed about our continued involvement with that activity? A little further down.
Yeah. Nope, back up.
Melissa.
Second half of that page.
It comes right after conservation.
So my guess is down just a little bit more, sustainability was a new department that was added to the town this year, and it is quite possible that we have not allocated that out properly at this point to point to the new department instead of the conservation department. So right now those are probably still mixed together. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Porter. I appreciate it. We will
Thank
get
you.
right on that. It is a small thing, but it is something that I think more than likely, just account numbers did not get changed properly, and we just need to do a little fix there. I apologize.
It's a one-person department, Tom, and that used to be
That was part of conservation in
was
previous
part of
years, and
conservation.
something must have got mixed up in the account numbers and breaking it out there. I apologize.
Just wanted to make sure it hadn't turned out to be unsustainable.
No.
So I think with that, Melissa, we can go to your trying to take on the question of free cash. And I guess it's also, you know, where the ARPA complexity of it.
Yeah. All right. So this is my little free cash explanation, I guess. And so this is our definition that we publish in the budget every year. So where free cash comes from. And so free cash is generated from three primary sources: the prior year fund balance, which the part that we're going to talk about of fund balance, there's a lot of parts that go into fund balance, and you know, it's a lot to explain how our outside accountants, our DOR, and that come to fund balance. But the part that matters to us in this discussion is the unspent part of free cash in a previous year. So if we think about, okay, last year there was unspent balance in free cash, there was revenue surpluses, and there were budget surpluses. Those three things make up the major components of our free cash. So if we look at the 2025 free cash certification that happened in November of this year, 4.6 million of that was the remaining free cash of the prior year. 1.8 million was budget that was unspent in various departments, and 4.17 million was revenue surplus. And how that broke down is that the 1.4 million was primarily the interest income. And we'll talk about that. It made up a good portion, 43% of that revenue surplus. And then the other contributing factors were license and permits, motel and meals tax, and motor vehicle excise tax. So those were all of these, just, you know, to remind everyone, these are economic drivers. Did you want to say something, Holly, before I keep going on this?
Sorry, I left my hand up. Apologize.
Okay. And then 1.8 million of our budget surpluses, meaning unspent funds, were mostly due to staff vacancies. And so we'll go into a breakdown of how those staff vacancies flowed into the other flowed into free cash. But I do want to sort of make note here that these were staff vacancies within the town departments for the town side, and how those surpluses were generated, because for a number of years, we have not increased operating expenditures to the extent necessary to deal with the rising costs of all goods. So, you know, lighting bills, gas, office supplies, you know, maintenance on software, all of these areas are rising year over year. And before that surplus is close to free cash, any expenditure where we have not budgeted enough, you know, gets covered by the vacancy in the department. So I just want us to sort of call out that these vacancies that we have is what's creating those absences. I mean, those surpluses. It's not in like we have too much budgeted for travel or we have too much budgeted in training. Those lines are very small and they have not changed in many years in the town of Amherst. So this is the budget surplus sort of breakdown of like what areas it came from. So, you know, it's been talked about a great deal that this $56,000 was from the elementary schools. You know, how that played out, like what that was caused from, I don't really know. But, you know, I just want to, you know, that's what of the surplus that we had on the budget side, that's the elementary school contribution. And I know that's been talked about a lot. The biggest area where there were vacancies this is blue is public safety. So they had a lot of vacancies in that department. And the reason that the town or the general government category is so large is because all the vacancies that were in planning and development or community services or public safety or public works, their insurance benefits live in the general fund government. So that's when we see the surplus flow through of the insurance payments that we made with ARPA funds, they'll show up under general government because that's where we house all of employee benefits. So, you know, it might be an employee in public works that's that it has a vacancy, but their insurance is covered by the HR department or the benefits expense line, which sits in general government. Because investment income, I'll go right to income. Investment income is such a big driver in what our surpluses were for the prior year and will probably be for this year. I just wanted to share again with the committee that, you know, over the past 20 years, this is really an anomaly. And I do want to say that I have looked at and I have information on, so the interest rate in these years in like 2007, 2008 was slightly higher than it is today. And so this interest income or investment income is driven slightly. It's around the same rate as it was in 2007, 2008 for what our legal investments for a municipality. And so the reason that these numbers are so high, again, is because we have deferred capital projects and large cash on hand for projects that have been stalled. So we had the ARPA money in hand, which was $11 million starting in like 2001, 2000, or 21 and 22. And then we had the revenue from the bond for the school project, which is just now beginning to spend. We have several capital projects, meaning a fire truck that was been on order for 3 years that might cost $1 million+. So if we have 2 or 3 or more of those projects, so now we're talking $20 to $25 million that we are earning interest on at a pretty decent rate in the 4 to 5% range. But the reason that our investment income is so high is because we have the cash on hand. That cash is being spent. So that's why I am reluctant to project that into future years, because at the interest rate, even if they stay at 4 or 5%, and they are slightly coming down right now, if we don't have those kind of cash reserves on hand, we won't be able to make this kind of investment income. So that's my talk on that. Then the other part of this, you know, a big focus of this has been about the local receipts, and the local receipts that are driving income are motor vehicle receipts, rooms, meals, and permits. So I did a 20-year look back of all local receipts, which is this here in the turquoise, and then I did just these major drivers, the ones that seem to be performing above what where the other local receipts might be more stable. And so you can kind of see that they sort of they move up and down, and they kind of move up and down with the whole of the local receipts. So I just want to point out that there are spike years in local receipts, and that years that some things perform well, other things don't, and that it's not a clear elevating line. It's sort of more of a rolling hills revenue source. And then finally, I just wanted to look at all the components that make up local receipts, because this has been a large topic of conversation. And I want to remind people that local receipts make up I looked back over a number of years, between 8 and 11% of the overall revenue received for the town. So it is, even if you push those receipts, they do not make a substantial change in the amount of services you can provide. They do not, and they're slightly inconsistent year over year. And so that's why we always conservatively budget for them, so that in the down years, we don't feel that hit. So the big drivers, the biggest things are these special assessments, and this has to do with our interdepartmental, where we charge the enterprise. This is for general fund work, so that money flows in. That's a very stable number. We know what it's going to be every year. We don't miss that's not something we underestimate. We kind of know that ahead of time, and we make that entry. 18% of our investment income in 2024, 18% of our local receipts in 2024 was investment income. So it's 20% of a small of 20% of 10% is that's the driver. It's a very small part of the overall picture. And in years that it was 150, which was not too long ago, it's going to be one of these small slivers. Motor vehicle excise is, again, 19, 20%. That's a big driver. That is something that is more reliable and that we can kind of push year over year, and we try to move that up quite a bit this year. Meals tax ends up being about 5% of the overall pool of this, and these pilot payments in 2024 were about 8%. But like I said, that's a number that, based on the language of those agreements, may change. And so here, where Councilor Haneke had talked about before, so our certified free cash at the beginning of 2025, or in November, when it was certified, was $10 million. We took out the opioid settlement, the reparations stabilization, and these are sort of planned surpluses. We don't budget for these monies so that we can know that we can put those monies aside for special reserves for these purposes. We spent $75,000 on a waste hauler project. We moved $3.9 million to our capital stabilization for future projects. We bought a sidewalk equipment for $140,000. Here's the withdrawal for the Bank Center of the 2.8. And then we did a supplemental appropriation for roads and sidewalks of $500,000. And so this brings our free cash balance down to 2.6. So that's where you're going to see it as it flows through. So when we start next year, our starting free cash balance is 2.6. And you'll recall earlier in the presentation, we started at 4.6. So we're going to start at a much lower number when we go to certify our free cash this year than we did last year, because we've spent this sort of 2.8 earlier than it was certified, right? So we expect it to flow through, but we spent it now because it was available. And for the committee's information, this $2.6 million, essentially $2.7 million, represents about 2.73% of our general fund budget. So we aim for maintaining a balance of 5%, and we are below that right now. It's a planned below that, and the reason we keep 5% is so that we have the flexibility to do things like this, and I'm not concerned about it, but it does mean that our starting balance to going into next year is going to be smaller. So when we get our certified cash next year and it's $7 million and not 10, that's why.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. And
Yeah.
Melissa will put this in the packet. So we will have it. That's the line in the agenda that says free cash explanation. Are there any questions on what we just heard? Comments or questions? It was very useful, and thank you for the charts, because I have a district meeting coming up where at least some of these charts will be very useful from what I have already heard are some of the questions about the year that just ended.
Okay.
I don't see any hands unless I'm missing them. So I think that's finished. And now what I'd like to do is go to Melissa has updated the budget projections. So if everyone's okay, I think we have enough time to do that now and then have a quick discussion about planning for our future meetings, because that was sent to all of you. So is that all right to put that here before we get to agenda setting with everyone? I'm seeing heads kind of nodding. All right.
Yeah.
So you're on again, Melissa.
Okay. I'm going to try and find. Here it is.
If I can just frame this, Kathy. So staff have been looking, Melissa and Holly and other staff have been trying to work on our projections to see how we can tighten up everything. And we're beyond the comfort zone at this point, but I think it's still an attempt to create more room to increase budgetary. And I also want to frame that this is not just the schools, but right now, the town side, when we're looking at our budgets, is over $500,000 in the hole. And we've never been that big in the hole at this late in the year. And we really are struggling with how we're going to meet that deficit in our budget ourselves. So it's a shared problem that's with the schools and the library and ourselves as well. So, but this is our latest projection, and Melissa, we're going to walk through it.
Sure. And before we get to that, one other thing that we wanted to talk about is that we have the good news, bad news, and that is that our health insurance has gone up, still double digits. However, we have worked with the Insurance Advisory Committee, and what was originally projected as close to a 20% increase, 19.92% increase, has been reduced through the work of the Insurance Advisory Committee and our insurance provider in plan design changes to bring our premium increase down to, is it 14.2%? Percent? So that was an enormous contribution that all of the members of our collective bargaining group participated in, and it is an agreement to shift the cost of health insurance back to the user, if that's not unclear. So that is everyone in the town stepping up to say, now's the time.
So yeah, just to add on that, so just to credit, all the unions were at the table, the proverbial table. We sit in a circle actually, and by shifting co-pays, by shifting deductibles, and by increasing those, it really does shift the cost to the employees. But we had not done that for a while, and so we had that tool that we could implement. And so I think everybody recognized that this is the year that we had to do those things. I mean, nobody's happy about we're not happy about a 14.2% increase, but it's closer to where we had been projecting at 13% at the time. And I just want to credit the leaders who are in that room, from the teachers, the fire, the police, the DPW, the SEIU, all were represented. And just Steve Gahn, who's our assistant fire chief, is the leader of the group, and retirees are also present. So, and the town of Pelham as well as present. So just a credit to his leadership and to the staff of the work that our staff have done to try to get as much as we can out of this.
So just the top of the projections here, I just wanted to call out because it was a topic of conversation in our last discussions, is that both motor vehicle excise and hotel motel and meals tax have been increased. And those were some of what we thought were our large increases. And then of course, the biggest increase, and I know that I will get feedback on this, is that we increase the investment income to 500,000, which I recognize is significantly less than we've collected this year. But I was uncomfortable going more than that, based on the fact that in the 18 years prior to 2023, it had never been above 500,000. Did Mandy Jo want to ask a question before we moved on?
It looks like it, because some of these numbers have not changed since the last time we saw it, but Mandy, go.
Yeah, this is where I see that you raised, well, hotel motel is still projected where it was back in February for BCG at 700,000, which is a raise from this year's current numbers of 620. But when you look at current receipts, meals has brought in, currently meals and hotel motel together have brought in over $500,000 halfway through the years. Presumably both of them are fairly steady 6 months and 6 months, that we don't necessarily have unlike other local receipts that, where excise, motor vehicle excise doesn't come until February. Hotel, motel, and meals presumably are fairly steady year round. Meals was budgeted at 400 and they've brought in 214 already, but hotel, motel was budgeted at 220 for the 620 for the current fiscal year total budget, and has already brought in 314,000. So if you double that $500,000, you get up to $1 million, which is in line to FY24's numbers and well above this 700, and above FY20's 3 numbers, and just slightly above FY22 when we were closer to coming out of COVID. So I'd like an explanation as to why you're uncomfortable going a little higher on that number, given the trends we're seeing with them running towards nearly $1 million a year in FY24, projected at this point to potentially be close to $1 million a year. I know we won't know.
Right.
And same with licenses and permits. When you look at the licenses and permits, it's already 875,000 for this year alone. It was budgeted at 991. That budget the projection has only gone up $20,000. Yet the lowest number in the last 4 years is 1.3 million. And so to me, those are the two that seem lowballed when we're trying to push. And I guess I'm just not quite hearing reasons why they're still that much lower than what we're actually seeing on the ground year after year.
So I think that you are looking at what we're seeing year after year, as economies recover. And I am more pessimistic about our future maybe than you are. And so I would say that the hotel motel tax and building permits are a reflection of the economy. And as things in the economy change, those numbers are less stable. So right now, especially in the building industry, this threat of you know, what's going to happen with the building industry and rising costs due to decisions that are being made elsewhere, I'm not sure that those permits will continue. So we get permits based on large construction projects that are already in the pipeline. I don't know what the appetite will be for construction in the pipeline going forward. And while you point out that we have this rental permit, that is not what's driving those large licensing permits. They're several $100,000 for very large projects, apartment complexes, large buildings on college campuses that feed those permits. And so I don't know that, you know, year to year, we have one or two that sort of drive that and move that number quite a bit, but they're not the base of like, I'm doing a kitchen remodel, or I've got to put a deck on, or I need a roof today. Though that's not what drives those big numbers. It's the development in town. And so while I hope that it continues, I don't know that it will. And that's why I looked at a history that went back more than the last couple of years so that we could look at what happens when the economy changes. And nothing would make me happier than to be wrong, but that's why we budget conservatively. We're pushing the numbers more than we have in the past. We hear you, but that's, I mean, that's my answer on why I believe that these numbers are more aggressive than they've been in the past, but still within the normal guise of our conservative budgeting, so we don't find ourselves trying to make up for a big dip in a revenue line that we can't make, but we can't find somewhere else.
Andy?
Yeah, on the hotel motel, I was curious, and meals taxes. How frequently do we receive payments from the state, and are they done evenly throughout the year in
Quarter.
amount? Do we get both? Do we get larger amounts in some quarters than others?
So it's a quarterly payment for hotel motel meals tax. I think we receive it. It's been a long time since I actually processed the payment, but I think we receive it like in April for March, quarter one, quarter two. And it's based on what the restaurants and the hotels are reporting for their sales, because it's a percentage of it's a sales tax, a local option sales tax. So, for instance, the hotels here are always busy in the spring, you know, because of graduations and such, and they tend not to have a whole lot of business in January. So it's seasonal in that sense. My assumption is that our meals tax is probably greater during the school year just because we have more people here in town, but I don't know that. I haven't tried to track it.
So while we're on this page, I'm looking at the projections as of the beginning of February. So the last time when you did the increase, and a lot of the numbers are the same. The one actually declined. Miscellaneous was at 340 and you've dropped it to 115, which makes the local receipts line also drop. I think that's the one change I saw on that. So rather than it be an increase compared to why did you drop it?
So that has to do with the language of the Amherst College agreement that designates their pots of money to specific projects that fall outside of like just to use forever, whatever the town wants. So if we put it in here as miscellaneous, then that implies that it's for the town to use at the town's discretion. Their language in their agreement is very targeted to specifically downtown business improvements to roads and sidewalks.
Okay, but they didn't exist in FY 25, that agreement. And we, on miscellaneous, had 340.
Right, so they used to pay an ambulance fee for the services that they receive from our ambulance services. They've elected to instead do a more rich, I mean, it's more than I think they previously paid, Holly might be able to correct me, like 180 for ambulance services that the town provides to the campus. And now they are giving a gift specifically to the fire and police department.
So I won't push you hard on this because I'm just quickly comparing them, but when I get all the way to the bottom line, the result, I think, of that one changing, but I don't know what else, is the projection of revenues is a little lower than it was. It's about, it's a little lower than it was a month ago. So I'm just looking at the total.
Yeah, it's because of that one line.
It's cut because if they've moved it, but it's still more money, it should show up somewhere in revenues is what my assumption would be.
No, it won't. It's a gift.
So gifts don't show up in revenues. Interesting.
Correct.
And the same would go for the schools. They get a $250,000 gift from Amherst College that goes straight to them.
And okay. All right, I will stop, but Mandy, I was just going back and forth to see what was higher or lower, and that was the one that's lower, and I don't think anything went up. The community preservation, some things at the bottom I'm not going to worry about because they're paid for in a different way. So Mandy's hand is up and Bob's. And we haven't even gotten to the expense side yet, so.
So ambulance fund went up by about $500,000 from the last projections in early February.
It's because of their capital request was higher than we had anticipated. So when we started to put the capital budget together, you'll see when we get to the expense side that we've increased their capital requests, and so it's an offset. And I do believe that we probably made up a little bit of the decrease in the miscellaneous from ambulance receipts because there might have been some room there.
So I do have a question about that, and I know we don't have the expenditure side up yet, but the ambulance fund has on revenue side 3.4 million now projected. You said the cash capital ambulance fund will be increasing, but even when the ambulance fund was projected at 3 million in February, the cash capital ambulance fund line was only projected at 450,000. So
right, it's now at 674.
Can you tell me where the rest of that difference between 3 million and 600, whatever it is, that extra sort of 2.5 million that is coming in revenue for ambulance fund, is there a place in the expenditure side that it is dictated to, or is that actually ambulance fund revenues that are
so two parts? So
amongst all the operating budgets?
So yes, so yes. So to the extent that there's cash capital for ambulance fund, i.e. we're going to buy an ambulance with ambulance fund, that's 674, and this goes in and comes out. The other 2-point-something million, I think it was 2.5 and it's now 2.8, that brings the ambulance fund up. That's from ambulance receipts. So the ambulance company or the ambulance providers, i.e. the fire department, same people, when they do an ambulance run, some of their runs are paid for by your insurance, my insurance, Medicare, whatever. They bring in several $1,000,000 a year in that revenue that goes to the ambulance fund. Some of that ambulance fund money is to buy the equipment that they need in order to operate an ambulance. And some of it goes as a transfer to the general fund to recognize the cost of operating that general fund expense, i.e. the department. So they do not make enough money to fully support a fire department that provides ambulance services. However, their revenue that they receive for this does supplement the their department, but it doesn't supplement them directly. It comes into the general fund, and therefore, once it comes into the general fund in this way, it gets broken out 4 ways. Very similar to the rental registration money.
Thank you. So it's actually, those ambulance fund receipts in a sense are supporting all of our schools too, when we increase that number year over year.
Right. I mean, yeah.
Bob,
So I want to get back to the issue about the roads and sidewalks within the bid. Is that grant going direct, or that gift going directly to the bid, or is it to the town in order to deal with sidewalks and roads within the business improvement district?
It's
So-
to
But I can address
Oh,
that.
go
So
ahead.
it's really a designated fund to support downtown improvements. It doesn't specifically say roads and sidewalks. It's for downtown improvements. The bid has nothing to do with it. That just defines the area. So the nonprofit bid has nothing to do with this. These are town funds that we would allocate. And what we had talked about was specifically was the improvements to the town common, the additional maintenance cost of addressing the North Common, which is a new thing that we don't have, and also the things that front on their property, i.e. the and on Boltwood and places like that.
So where does that show up? Does that show up in the expenditures, or
That'll be that's a gift account, basically,
gift account?
because
Okay.
they for the college defined this as a contribution.
so does
For
the
what-
expense for it also show up in the gift account, Paul?
Yes.
Thank you. Andy,
So Mike, when we get money from other sources to support services, and I'm thinking right now of is the example, the EAPS money we get for the CREST program. Does that show up in this page, or in the expense side of this chart, or is that dealt with separately?
So grants are reported separately. These are only general fund accounts. So so everything that you see above other financing sources is a general fund revenue. And then anything below that is a non-general fund revenue that has been transferred into the general fund. So we don't report on this. We don't do operating budgets on grant funds. So there are grants, like you said, for the CREST department, the police department, the dispatch receive not grants in the same size as maybe the CREST department. The school department sees many grants as part of how Council on Aging receives a grant. So lots of grants come in, and they're not reported in this part of the budget.
So when you are considering public safety on the allocation of funds, and if the grant funds disappear, but we want to maintain a service at the level that has to be accounted for within your budgeting beneath the
Correct. So right now, I know for dispatch, their grants are usually around training, so they don't support staff. It's just something that helps them support training. But if that should go away or they need additional training above that grant, then that was something that the general fund would have to support. In particular, the CREST department that you asked about, they do receive a large grant. However, most of their staff is paid for under the general fund. And that's the budget you see in the budget book last year. Was for their staff and a small operating amount.
Okay. The reason I asked the question, just so that everybody knows, I don't want to hide this, is that it's sometime we're going to have to get more of an assessment of it. In October, of course, the council wrote a letter to the governor that talked about the importance of the EAPS money to our CREST program. I looked at the governor's budget and there was no money for that line item in the governor's budget. And I was trying to figure out what that means for future planning.
So if I can respond to that. So yeah, I think Lynn put that in her president's report that our conversations with the our senator and state rep had identified the fact that this, again, which wasn't included in the governor's budget last year, but was included by action of the state legislature. They're going to, again, try to get the money into the budget, but there's no sure thing about that. So it's a very real concern for us.
I suggest we go to the expense side because I want to come back to this issue when we look at your expense projection and also the way we see FY25 expenses.
Okay.
So this is big news in this budget, right?
Yeah. So this is us. So I mean, as you stated, the above the revenue side did not change dramatically, in any way, shape, or form. So, how did we get to a 4%? And we did choose to present this, as we always have in the past, as evenly distributed among the 4 major operating areas. I think that on the last presentation of this, we had already cleaned up the capital and sort of made sure that, I'm not sure when we did this, but we made sure that the debt and the capital expenditures for the like the ambulance were in line with what we had submitted, so that our JCPC reports could balance to these reports. And so what the major change is here is that we've taken a careful look at some of these miscellaneous and unappropriated expenses to see if there was any room to be less conservative. And so in the area of reserve for abatements and exemptions, we have decided we've had a standing practice that is, sort of in line with DOR, that we allocate 1% of our tax revenue to reserve for abatements and exemptions. And we've took a look at this and thought that perhaps we could, instead of doing 1%, we could do 0.5% in this year and see how that would flow through, because we felt that that was something that that we could try this year to see if to try and push the budget on so that we could get to the 4% again this year. We might have looked at our interdepartmental transfers, but I'm not sure if that changed from last time or if we changed that a few weeks ago.
I'm looking for any questions or comments on this, and I have one. Mandy?
So obviously this is good news. I thank you for looking at the reserve for abatement and exemption. It's one where you don't get an idea year after year whether you quote needed it all, because it just disappears in the actuals for obvious reasons. And so I appreciate that look of trying to figure out what we can do with that. Paul, earlier in this meeting, you mentioned that this is an uncomfortable budget for you, but that this time of year, you're not normally facing a deficit, and this year you're facing a $500,000 general government deficit. Is that even with this 4% increase? And if so, what does that mean for services in general government? And then I have another question about the region.
Mandy, I also don't
but I'll
see
stick with that one.
I don't see the 500,000. So the bottom line has not a 500,000, but
No,
I'd like
so
to hear.
what I think I said earlier in this meeting that at this point, when we're building our budgets for FY25, for FY26, we are about $540,000 in the hole. I think this brings us another $140,000. I think, Melissa,
Yep, this brings us another 140.
Going from 3.5 to 4, so we still have a significant hole that we have to fill and figure out where that. And we don't know. We're still going through department by department on what their budgetary needs are.
So I guess let me use lines that the schools have used. Your level services budget at this point, I know it might not be considered level services, is approximately $400,000 above the 29.356 million that is listed here.
Exactly.
I would no, actually not. I would say it's level services minus any kind of cost increases for fuel, for energy, anything like that. It's a flat expense budget, but the first thing we do is incorporate the salaries, and we're with just doing the salaries and the health insurance, we're about $500,000 in the hole.
I'll let Kathy go. I have a question about region.
I think Holly was going to speak to this also.
Well, I think that Councilor Haneke just sort of hit it right on the head. Is what I wanted to try to explain to folks is this budget projection is the entire town's budget, elementaries, region, and that and the libraries and the municipal, and that 27,000 that's showing is a surplus in all 4 budgets together when we're trying to do the revenue. What we are trying to do now is to live within our number, which is the 29.4 million currently. And Mandy Jo just, I think, explained it how I was going to explain it. When we try to take all of our departments and fit them into that number, that's where we're short. We're not short in this projection currently, but the difference between what Paul was stating was about a $500,000 deficit, and you're seeing 27,000, 2 completely different things. And I think Mandy explained it as I was going to, so I was going to put my hand down, but thank you.
So if we, and I'm not saying that the council necessarily would go there, but if we said, give schools more of what you just found, so leave everyone else leave library in town at 3.5, what would the increase for the schools be?
So the amount that includes the increase for the town and the Jones Library is $153,000. So then if you took that away from the town and the library, that's what would be available to be redistributed to the schools.
Okay. Thank you. And then I just want to come back, Paul, to me, which seems the grants are somewhere else. So if let me stay with FY25, which is the year we know, if Cress's grant has come in and it's paying for, it equals 30% or 40% of our budget, and our budget would be both salaries and benefits. How do we ever see that the general fund is having a supplement to it from the grant fund? So it's not carrying that in terms of the full amount. So it's what Andy was asking for. If we're not showing the grant here, but we know, say we think the Crest all of Crest with benefits runs at $1 million and we bring in $400,000 of a grant. How do we ever see that? Where do we see it?
So all grants for the library, the schools, both schools and the town are all aren't part of this. This is how you're dividing up the town's tax dollars. This is not the budget document. This is projecting how you want to expend the town's tax dollars. That's the question that this document tries to address. When you if we get a grant that happens to pay for an employee, then that means that would show up in a surplus for the next year. The grant that Crest has isn't to pay for its employees, it's for all the other work that they can do. There's some, we can pay for, I think there's some provision for some staffing. The implementation manager, for instance, that isn't part of our normal budget. So for any of our departments, schools, all of us, I mean, there's lots of different grants that we all get that are reported in the budget book. We typically provide a total list of all the grants on the town side. We don't give a list of the grants on the school side. That would be in their budget if they wanted to provide it or not.
You're saying that the grant Crest gets doesn't do salaries at all?
I think I just have to look. I think it pays for one person. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mandy.
So, this might get addressed tomorrow at BCG, but I am struggling with what to do about the region and the regional assessment and our responsibility to the region versus the other 3 towns' responsibility to the region, our responsibility to our own taxpayers. I'm going to go on for a little bit because I'm struggling with how to word this too. But this regional, I don't know what the school committee will do, but the superintendent has been aiming for a 4% total assessment year-over-year increase. And there's been a debate as to how to split that amongst the 4 towns because we are a 4-town region, and there doesn't seem to be agreement on how to do it. If we followed the regional agreement, we would have on our assessment a year-over-year 2.33 increase, plus $350,000. It would be on the prior number $220,000 less than we were budgeting with a 3.5% year or the 5.5% year-over-year increase. That if we followed that method, we could reallocate to, say, our elementary schools. But instead, the superintendent is asking us to allocate that to the region and reduce Pelham and Leverett's assessment share by $220,000, essentially having Amherst's taxpayers reduce Pelham and Leverett's property tax bills. If we increase, and because they're asking us to do 3.5 and Pelham and Leverett to do less than their regional agreement method, if we increase our assessment willingness to 4% year-over-year, have you talked to the superintendent about the other 4 towns also increasing their assessments for the year so that it's not a 4% year-over-year for the schools? For the regional school, it's a 4.x%, because if we do it and the other towns don't, basically what I'm struggling with is the schools are not getting any more money. The schools are still getting a 4% year-over-year total assessment increase. And basically, we're sending money to the region to subsidize and lower Pelham and Leverett and Shutesbury's own property tax bills. And that doesn't seem right to me. Yet, at the same time, when I listened to the regional budget hearing, I had a couple of thoughts. Nearly every commenter, I think there was one that did not live in Amherst, which then presents my other problem of, if Amherst's parents are the only parents that care about the cuts, should we be forcing a regional agreement? Again, I'm not sure how to word this, right? But if Leverett, Pelham, and Shutesbury are perfectly fine with a 4% year-over-year increase with whatever they're getting, and Amherst parents are not, should we be gifting this to the region above it and not necessarily pushing for a regional agreement method if the other 3 towns won't agree to that split. Yet, if we pushed for a regional agreement method, the region could have 270 some thousand more dollars. So I guess with this proposal, I guess my question to Melissa and Paul at this point is, where does that money go? Is it going to subsidize Leverett and Pelham's and lowering their year-over-year increase and their assessment more? Or is this going to be considered a potential gift to the region above and beyond that 4% year-over-year increase that the superintendent has been aiming for the region is sort of my first part. And then I just don't, I'm still struggling with the rest of how does a 4-town region work when every single commenter at the regional hearing and even school committee members said, we want it from Amherst and ignored the other 3 towns when we are a 4-town region.
Can I just build on what, because I would think what you're asking, Mandy, is why should we be tougher on moving toward the statutory method, which is what's in the agreement, and we're departing from it when we don't do this. And that's a town kind of negotiation. That's not within the school committee. So it's looking to our town manager, finance director, whatever, or the finance committee. I think that's what you're asking, correct? You know, that there's a methodology that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's a lot of it was my own struggles with what do I do about the region, but yeah, how much should we, if we're going to go up to 4, but the whole agreement, the whole total assessment will not increase 1 dime, why should we go up to 4? Because we're basically lowering other towns. Shouldn't we stay at 3.5% and give that extra 0.5% money to the elementary schools, for example, and redistribute it that way?
Well, Melissa's hand is up.
So I have what I hope would happen. And so what I think the intent is that we're trying to do as much as we can to be supportive of the region and listen to what people are asking for. And that doesn't take away from the responsibilities of the other towns. So just because Amherst is going to go from 3.5 to 4, I think those discussions about the other communities going to 6 or 7 should remain. And maybe they don't go up as much as we do, but, you know, we're, you know, without doing anything different than we always have. We've always tried to be fair and distribute this evenly. And when they ask for, give us more and less to the library, I'll pick on them because they're not here, right? And say, well, that seems unfair. We'll give you as much as we can. And if that's more than what the statutory agreement is, then we've done everything we can. So why are you asking more of us when this is, you know, we're struggling too. And I think that we just need to find a way to say that. And I don't want this to become an us versus them. And it's not us versus Pelham or Leverett or Shutesbury. It's what can we afford? What makes us all work? And you know what? It's a bad year for all of us. It's not any worse for them or any worse for us. It's just a tough year. And I think that, you know, if we pull back from what we've always done, then we are not supporting the schools. But I don't think that there's any advantage to going above and beyond what we've always done in order to help when it doesn't benefit the schools, when they don't actually get more. The idea is that this actually gets them more. And that was my thought on it anyway. I don't know if that's how it'll work out, but you know, while we're talking hopes and dreams, there we are.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think that we can control what we can control, and that's what we're trying to do based on, you know, we always said when we would, if we could produce more revenue and projection. You, in your guidelines, you said tighten them up, which we have done. And now that's why we're presenting it to you now in the normal way, excuse me, the way normally we have assessed it. Now, I think that the question that Mandy Jo brings up is important. It's like, if this is a net zero for this region, why do this? I mean, we could do go through the gift route again, as we have in the past. But I think that really is a decision by the school committee in terms of what the budget that they're going to approve and the assessment method that they're going to recommend.
Mandy, and I'm also conscious of the time. It's 3:55, so I'm not saying I'm cutting this off, but I'm just conscious of.
No, I could go on forever and I'll deal with some of it at BCG tomorrow. But I just want to make two more things. So from what I've just heard from the two of you, Paul and Melissa, you do not know whether this would result in actual more money for the region at this point, that 3.5% to 4% increase, because you have not talked to the superintendent or the school committee, obviously, about what they might do with an extra 0.5% from us. So maybe we'll find out tomorrow what that might be. And I guess number two is, I'd like your thoughts on how to advocate for moving to the regional assessment with all the numbers I've crunched. Even if we were at the regional assessment last year and we were at the regional assessment this year, giving Amherst $220,000 more to hand to the elementary school, as I would call it, Pelham would need to increase their year-over-year spending by 11.5%. Right now, they're projected to only increase their year-over-year spending by 6.5%. They are getting farther away from their regional agreement method by over $80,000. They were $80,000 away, lower than their regional agreement method last year, and at the 6.5% year-over-year increase, they will be at $140,000 plus under their regional agreement assessment method. That's why I talk about $220,000 that we could put to the elementary school if we forced the regional agreement. What are your thoughts on how we best help our taxpayers get the best money and services for their taxes, when I look at this and say, we could put that $220,000 to the elementary schools and reduce their quote operating deficit, or help you, Paul, reduce yours, when in theory the region would get the same amount of money by forcing or advocating for that regional agreement method. What are your thoughts on some of that and how to best do that?
I don't have good.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't have really good answers. I mean, we were working on the getting to this 4% as of this morning, quite honestly, and feeling like we felt comfortable. Where comfortable is an odd word, but to say we were willing to put this out there. I think there's a real conversation to be had with our colleagues in the other towns, but yeah, I just don't want to speculate without thinking deeper about it.
So I think that might be a good way to close this, because we'll have to return to it when we get to the budget. We don't have enough time. I don't want to keep people longer than time to talk about meeting schedule. You have in the, actually, I don't think, Melissa, you put it in the packet, but we'll put it in the packet. I sent it to everyone, potential meetings. And what I had proposed was similar to what we've done the last couple of years, where we meet twice a week in May. And that generates enough meetings if we group departments to cover all the departments and have time to do our report. And the one missing member for today said he liked it. And if we were asking for volunteers, because the other part of the process has been someone takes the responsibility for one of those groupings, and both does questions in advance and then writes up a section of the report. And Bernie offered to do either general government or DPW. So he said, I won't be here, but I'll take one of those two. So he gave a nod. So I see, Mandy, you have your hand up. And so I don't want to take a lot of time, but the other thing you should see is when talking with Paul and Melissa on what we have coming to us, it's possible we might not need 2 meetings in April. So I had one as possible cancel, so that knowing what we're going into May, and that was based on, we've got an auditor's report coming to us, we've got CPAC coming to us, we have a couple others, but we don't have, it looked like we had enough meetings without having to in April. So that was the one other thing I wanted to flag. It wouldn't be canceled, but we might not have to. So I see, Mandy, your hand is up on, I think, this topic, correct?
Yeah, just the meeting schedule. I think we need times because you and I on Thursdays have a 4 to 6 meeting every other Thursday in May. And so I know the budget ones tend to go more than 2 hours. So if you were looking at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., you and I would struggle 2 of those 4 weeks to make one of them without missing parts of another potentially. So maybe a poll for times on Thursdays that might work for people, or a poll for times on Fridays that might work for people before we get to our next meeting for that second one.
Okay, so it's looking for the second meeting in May, and is it a Thursday? And if it's a Thursday, what are some time slots? So we could do that. Andy?
Yeah, the regional schools usually doesn't, since that it's a separate process, and we will have probably had to voted on it already. It's not going to be part of it. So that was just general comment. The other thing that, as far as process is concerned, I was wondering if there's a way we can consolidate, as Sean did last year. Is Melissa going to do it this year? To take questions from all counselors,
Yes.
all members of this committee, in addition to the obvious ones that come from the person assigned, to make sure that we have the base questions.
Yeah, if I didn't put that in my memo, I meant to, Andy, absolutely, that we would let people know what's coming up. We don't have a schedule right now. I just did groupings, and it would be all counselors as well as everyone here gets their questions in, and we get them in before the meeting that addresses that as much as we can. That would be absolutely good. And Bob, I see your hand.
Yeah, there's one other thing real quick,
Okay.
so I don't have to come back again. And that's just a request to Melissa to add those items to the packet right after the meeting, because I really, I have a presentation tonight to a district meeting and could use one of them, the one about the free cash.
Free cash is already in there.
Already there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I do think we do need to have extra meetings in May. I mean, I've been through this several years, as Andy knows and Kathy knows. You know, it is important that we split things up. And I'm very comfortable with any of the groupings that aren't claimed by other people. I'll be happy to pick any of those. I've done DPW before. I've done enterprise funds, which are now folded in with DPW. So, but I can do other things. So,
Okay, and then I see Mandy, and I just want to let people know that Alicia had to leave and said everything looks good to her. So that was a whatever. Mandy.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to respond to Andy. We ran into this problem with the regional schools last year. We can't vote on a regional school budget unless Paul proposes one and proposes the financial orders. So maybe a future agenda item, once we know what the region's budget vote is a discussion with Paul as to when those financial orders are going to come to the council, whether they'll come with the overall budget or whether they will come separately.
Okay.
And then I guess another potential future agenda for next meeting or the meeting after might be some stuff that comes out of BCG tomorrow. We don't know what will happen at BCG, but there might be some stuff that comes out of it.
Okay. So that, thank you, everyone. I mean, we managed to cover a huge amount, including an item that wasn't on it, thanks to the work of staff that I gather what you were saying, Paul, that you were working on this up to an hour before we met or 2 hours before we met. So, and BCG will see what we just saw tomorrow. So getting that in our packet is terrific. And so I thank you, everyone who put extra time and energy into it. And I think we're ready to adjourn. So I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
And I'll go around the room. Bob?
Aye.
Kathy's a yes. Mandy?
Aye.
And Andy? Mandy and Andy, or Counselor Haneke and Andy. So we are adjourned at 4:05, so we did quite well. Thank you all very much. See
everyone.
some of you tomorrow at JCBC. Bye.